Naples, the summer of 1558. Inside a modest workshop near the bay, a Neapolitan scholar named Giambattista della Porta is hunched over a wooden vessel packed with snow. He's 23 years old, already obsessed with secrets the natural world hasn't given up yet. He reaches into a small sack and pulls out a fistful of white crystalline powder. It looks like nothing. Coarse salt, maybe. He sprinkles it into the snow inside the mixture and waits. Minutes later, he pulls the flask back out. The liquid inside isn't just cold. It's freezing into slush on a day warm enough to make snow itself a luxury in southern Italy. Della Porta writes it down. He published it that same year in a book called Magia Naturalis, Natural Magic. And with that, a secret that had been quietly known in pockets of the ancient world became recorded science in Renaissance Europe. The powder was saltpeter, potassium nitrate, and what Della Porta had just demonstrated, almost as a party trick for noble dinner guests, was a working method of refrigeration. No icehouse, no imported snow alone, just a white mineral and a basic, repeatable chemical reaction. Here's the part that should stop you. This same substance, sitting in that sack in Della Porta's workshop, was also the single most strategically important material in Europe at that exact moment in history. It was the core ingredient in gunpowder. The thing that could chill a glass of water in minutes was the same thing kings were stockpiling to fight wars. That contradiction is where this story really begins. Because for the next 2 centuries, saltpeter would live a kind of double life. By day, in the hands of chemists and wealthy households, it was a tool for comfort. By night, in the hands of empires, it was a tool for war. And eventually one of those uses would completely consume the other. Let's slow down and understand what was actually happening inside that flask. Because the science here isn't complicated, and once you understand it, you'll never think about cold the same way again. You've felt this reaction before, even if you didn't know it. Think about an instant cold pack, the kind you'd grab from a first aid kit after twisting an ankle. You squeeze it, something inside ruptures, and within seconds the whole pack turns icy in your hands. There's no battery in there, no motor, no refrigerant gas cycling through coils. There's just a chemical, often a nitrate salt very close in family to saltpeter, mixing with water inside a sealed pouch. When that solid dissolves into the water, it has to break apart its own internal structure. That takes energy. And the only place that energy can come from is the heat already sitting in the water around it. So the salt effectively steals warmth from its surroundings to fuel its own dissolving. The water gets colder. Your cold pack gets colder. And 470 years ago, Della Porta's liquid got colder, for exactly the same reason. It's elegant, it's real chemistry, not folklore. And it worked reliably enough that it spread across European households as a genuine, repeatable cooling method, long before anyone had ever heard the word refrigerator. Now here's where I want you to actually sit with what could have happened next. Imagine a version of history where this technology kept scaling. Instead of staying locked inside cooling vessels and laboratory experiments, engineers in the 1600s and 1700s had figured out how to industrialize endothermic cooling the way they eventually industrialized steam power. Picture homes in colonial Virginia, in Restoration London, in 18th century Vienna, with rooms cooled not by burning fuel but by chemistry alone. No coal-fired boilers driving the process. No dependence on a centralized power source at all. Just regularly replenished mineral salts doing quiet distributed work, the same way a well does for water. It's a genuinely different version of the modern world. One where comfort doesn't automatically mean electricity. One where the entire trajectory of energy infrastructure, the power plants, the grids, the vulnerability we feel every time a heat wave threatens a blackout, might have developed differently. Because cooling itself wouldn't have been tied so completely to the electrical system from the start. That world didn't happen. And the reason it didn't happen is not the reason most people assume. It's tempting to say mechanical refrigeration simply came along, and saltpeter cooling lost the competition fair and square. That's part of the story, but it's not the real engine behind what happened. The real engine was supply, and who controlled it? Saltpeter was never an unlimited resource sitting around waiting to be scaled up for comfort. It had to be harvested, painstakingly, from manure-soaked soil, from the floors of stables and dovecotes, from cave deposits, through a slow process of leaching and boiling that took weeks. And starting in the late 1500s, right around the time Della Porta was writing about chilling liquids, European gunpowder demand was exploding. Spain, France, England, the Ottoman Empire, all of them were fighting wars that consumed saltpeter by the ton. Governments noticed the shortage fast, and they responded the way governments respond to scarce strategic materials. They took control of it. In England, royal saltpetermen had the legal right to dig up the floors of private stables, dovecotes, and even cellars, without the owner's permission, specifically to feed gunpowder production. The material that could chill your water was the same material the Crown could legally rip out from under your own house if the army needed it. That's the part that almost never gets told. Saltpeter cooling didn't fade away because chemistry failed it. It got starved out, because every gram that could have gone toward comfort was instead funneled toward muskets, cannons, and the near-constant warfare of early modern Europe. Civilian cooling was always competing against military demand for the exact same raw material, and military demand had the backing of the state. There was never a fair fight. By the time gunpowder eventually gave way to other explosives in the 19th century, and saltpeter's military pressure finally eased, a different rival had already arrived to fill the vacuum: mechanical refrigeration, compressors and refrigerant gases that could run continuously, indefinitely, without ever hitting the wall that chemical cooling always hit. And that wall matters too. Saltpeter dissolving in water isn't a renewable cycle. Once the water is saturated, the reaction simply stops. You can't keep adding more salt and expect more cooling forever. To cool a room continuously, you'd need a constant, fresh, and frankly enormous supply of minerals, recharged again and again, hour after hour. Even without the gunpowder competition, that scale problem alone would have made it brutally expensive to run for anything bigger than a cooling vessel or a dessert bowl. So you end up with two forces working against this technology at once: a strategic resource that the state needed more than its citizens did, and a chemical process with a hard physical ceiling that no amount of clever engineering could fully remove. Mechanical refrigeration solved both problems simultaneously. It didn't compete for a scarce wartime mineral, and it could run in an endless cycle instead of a one-time reaction. Once that technology matured, in the work of engineers like Carl von Linde in Germany in the 1870s, and later Willis Carrier in the United States at the turn of the 20th century, there was simply no reason left to revive the old chemical method. It had already been pushed out decades earlier by something far less glamorous than competition. It had been pushed out by war. Saltpeter's cooling power never actually stopped working. That part of the story is almost ironic. The exact same endothermic reaction Della Porta documented in 1558 is still chilling things today, just quietly, inside cold packs in gym bags and first aid kits, completely disconnected from the grand idea of cooling a home. And maybe that's the real lesson buried in this story. The technologies that win aren't always the ones that work the best in isolation. They're the ones that survive the economic and political pressures stacked against them. Saltpeter cooling was sound science, genuinely sound, but it existed inside a world at war with itself, where the very ingredient that could have brought comfort into ordinary homes was instead being dug out of stable floors by royal decree and shipped off to gunpowder mills. There's something worth sitting with here, especially now, in a country where summer heat waves regularly strain a power grid that almost everyone depends on completely. We live inside a single centralized system for cooling, the electrical grid, the same way 17th century households lived inside a single centralized system for saltpeter, controlled by the same kind of distant authority deciding who gets access and when. We tell ourselves our system is modern, electrical, scientific, nothing like that old mineral economy. But the underlying vulnerability is strangely similar. One critical input, one point of control and comfort for millions of people resting entirely on whether that supply holds. Della Porta's flask of frozen liquid sat in a Naples workshop for one quiet afternoon in 1558, a small, working proof that coal didn't have to come from anywhere centralized at all. It could come from a mineral in your own hand. We left that path not because it failed, but because something more powerful needed the same resource more urgently. The next time the power flickers on a 100-degree day, it might be worth remembering that the search for cooling we don't have to depend on anyone else for didn't start with solar panels or battery walls. It started with a strange white powder 4.5 centuries ago, and a question about who really controls the things that keep us comfortable.